Business Diplomacy Today, the podcast about international relations and geopolitics from a business perspective. We help you anticipate the changing political and societal trends that influence your business.
Today, we will talk about voting, and not just any form of traditional voting, a particular one, namely online or internet-based voting. And that is a timely topic for 2024. We live in the age of online, the age of the internet for sure, and we also currently in a year of record voting. A record number of people around the globe have already voted or will be voting during the course of this year. And my guest today to talk about this is an expert, obviously. Her name is Simone Ehrenberg-Silies, and she's a senior consultant at the Institute for Technology and Innovation at VDE-IT. She has over a decade of experience in foresight and technology assessment, and she has worked extensively with or for public clients, including the German Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Bundestag, the federal parliament, and also at the German central bank, the Bundesbank. Simone is passionate about exploring the intersection of technology, innovation, and societal transformation, and she has a particular focus on topics such as future of work, the future of payments, and geopolitical issues. So a lot of topics that we also address here at our podcast regularly. And we are obviously delighted to have her on the show. Welcome, Simone.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking to you about this really interesting issue of internet voting.
So do I. And let's maybe start with a definition. I already mentioned that we are talking about online voting, which is not necessarily the same as electronic voting. Could you maybe start off with giving us some kind of a definition what we're talking about here today?
Yes, as it comes to electronic voting, that is voting by means of non-networked voting computers or voting machines in polling stations. That is a sort of, you can call it electronic ballot box elections. And yes, I think the difference between electronic voting with voting machines and internet voting is quite clear, because internet voting, you do it with your personal end devices, which can be a smartphone or a laptop, and you do the voting, of course, from a distance and without the direct election supervision by electoral boards.
Understood. Now, hopefully, the majority of our listeners will have the privilege of voting for government officials on different levels in regular intervals. And I think still by far the most common way of voting is the traditional analog one, where you go to a polling station, you fill out some kind of piece of paper, you mark the candidates or the parties that you want to vote for, and then you fold it and you place it in an envelope in some kind of a ballot box where it will eventually be counted. Now, in terms of political elections, how big is the share of online voting around the world right now?
There are only a few states who offer that to their electorate, and I think it's only 14 states in the world who use it. I think it's only Estonia who offers it for the whole electorate. In some countries, only expats can use it, or people who belong to the military. Some countries have it only for special regions. So it is only 14 countries.
Okay, so it's still an outlier. Now, you have been looking into that. From your perspective, what are the reasons why countries are so reluctant to adopt these new technologies? And are they right in maybe being concerned or being not too willing to implement those possibilities, which I think undoubtedly technology-wise they exist, but they don't seem to be very common, as you just said?
Yes, I think they are absolutely right to be skeptical about internet voting, because you can manipulate the electoral results by cyber attacks or by manipulating the election process. And compared to conventional voting methods, you can manipulate everything. I mean, you can have manipulation as well for ballot box voting or for postal voting, but there you can only manipulate certain votes. But with internet voting, you can manipulate the whole thing. And I would say that it is as well sufficient that you have the allegation that you manipulated it, and it does not have to be true at the end, but it undermines trust in elections. And in the case of internet voting, you cannot do a recount or anything. You cannot do a recount which is understandable and comprehensible by each and everyone. So this is, I think, the main problem about internet voting, especially in this geopolitical context that we experience today.
So you alluded to what is probably one of the most important factors in elections, which is trust, or actual trust, also the perceived trust in the fairness of the process. And obviously, the more technology you apply, the more of a black box it becomes now. Let me ask you then, why is that a topic that you're even dedicating any attention to? One could say, well, if that is a non-starter for a number of reasons, why even bother? What are the things that you have been looking into in your work?
There are, of course, some assumed advantages as to internet voting. That is, for example, the better accessibility for people. That is the error-free vote counting. And of course, less time is required for the voter to vote by her or his smartphone. And internet voting enables complex ballot papers and voting systems. So it is quite easy with internet voting to change the order of candidates in a list election, or to give one candidate several votes if this is required by the voting system. And you have a longer period for casting votes. You can cast your votes until the very last second when the internet polling station closes. And of course, it has been a topic during the pandemic because it is another mode of distance voting, and obviously it protects against whatever infections.
You mentioned some of the advantages. Accessibility is one for sure. Now, so far we've talked about political elections, and obviously they're often the most highest stake elections that we can think of. Also, some of these elections tend to be very contentious. There is a lot of maybe suspicion also going on that whoever is in power right now may try to use the system or game the system in whatever way to maintain power. Now, we also vote in a lot of other circumstances. Shareholders vote in the annual assemblies. A lot of us are members of associations or neighborhood boards. Maybe in our homes, we are part of a condominium board or whatever it is. So we do not only vote in high-level presidential or national parliamentary elections. Are those solutions that you've been looking at maybe more suitable for these kind of lower importance type of elections?
Yes, I guess absolutely. We used it in Germany for a certain part of voters during the social elections. And I think the main reason to use it was to get a better voter turnout. This was not realized, but at least that was the intention. And we use internet voting for university elections. That is possible as well. And of course, the parties use it. If they want to determine a new leader, that is often done by internet voting. And I think that is a good possibility to use it. But yes, I mean, that could be another opportunity for a cyber attack as well, because if you vote for one of the party leaders of the main parties, that would probably become the next chancellor of the Republic of Germany. So you can try to influence the results. You can try to influence politics by influencing internet voting for a party leader as well. But I would say for these elections of minor importance, as in universities or the social elections, or maybe the elections of boards in local government or anything like this, this can be a really good method.
You mentioned obviously a second danger. One is, of course, that whoever runs the elections, the government or whatever entity it is, trying to manipulate the results. But obviously, there's also the danger of some kind of a third-party attack from the outside. And of course, we have all learned about those attempts to interfere with electoral processes by some authoritarian governments in different parts of the world. One thing I wanted to mention, also cost effectiveness, I guess, is an issue, right? I mean, running large elections is hugely expensive if you have to do everything by mail, by paper, you have to count the ballots. Is there an estimate on how the economical part plays out here? How much cheaper it is to actually run an online election compared to a traditional paper-based election?
I think the answer to the cost question is quite ambiguous, because what we see in countries that offer internet voting, they still have postal box voting and they still have voting in the polling station. So they have to hold up both systems, and this is, of course, very expensive to have both systems. And it is very expensive as well to build up the internet voting system. So there is not an answer to this question, what is less expensive, what is cheaper. That is still open to discussion, I guess.
One of the most prominent use cases, both in politics and maybe the private sector, of online voting that you have been looking at?
I think it's the elections in Estonia. More than half of the electorate is now voting online, and that is quite interesting. But we finished our empirical work there before we had the attack of Russia on Ukraine. And I think maybe that Estonians might develop a different attitudes towards internet voting now. But yes, everything there is working. There is the trust in the system is quite high still, and there hasn't been any major attack and not an allegation that a major attack has taken place.
Yeah, so Estonia, as far as I know, is also known as being a very tech-savvy or tech-enthusiastic culture. I think a lot of things work electronically there that maybe in other countries still require a paper-based process. So I think that's maybe also a cultural issue. But you said that even they might now be a bit more reluctant given the experiences with Russia and also the allegations and in some cases also proofs of attempted attacks on IT systems in the West, right?
Yes, this is a possible development, but as you say, Estonians are a really a tech-savvy nation. Almost all government services are online services. I think you only have to go in person to the administration if you want to get a divorce or if you want to register an enterprise. All the other things can be done online, and they have firms which have a lot of knowledge in cryptography and these issues. So I think that they are able to offer a high level of security for their internet voting system. But yes, with the developments in the world, they might as well consider it differently in the future, but we cannot see it right now in the data. But this is a possible development, of course.
Speaking about technology, how is this, or how are these systems set up generally from the technical or technological perspective? Is there a central server where voters have like a user account where they log in with a password, or does it work with some kind of an electronic ID? Tell us a little bit about how these things work from the IT perspective.
The Estonian system works with an electronic passport, and that is, of course, the best way for a secure authentication. There are as well systems which work with one-time passwords printed on paper, and they are not so secure because you can give your password to any other person. So the authentication question is quite important. The Estonian system has a website where you get your candidate list, and you can vote on this website, and they have as well an app that helps you to control whether your vote has been registered. This is very basic.
What about anonymity? So far, we talked about the possibility to somehow tamper with the results. But of course, the anonymity of the vote is also an essential part of democratic elections. How is that assured in such a system?
Well, the protection of the secrecy of the ballot is very much dependent on the specific technical and organizational design of the internet voting system. What is still unresolved is the long-term safeguarding of the secrecy of the ballot, because if we have quantum computers in several years, they will of course be able to decode the encrypted votes with the cryptography of today, and that is a big problem. And voting secrecy has some requirements. So you should make sure that there are no attacks on your device, on your smartphone. You have to make sure that there are no attacks on the transmission of the vote, and no attacks on the storage of the vote or the counting process. And what is quite dangerous as well is social engineering attacks. So if you give someone your password, or if you don't vote on the official voting site, but if you are led to another site and you put your vote there, then yes, it's in vain.
So essentially, we have the same problems that we have with other use cases of technology as well. We have phishing attacks, we have scammers who somehow try to get access to the sites on our behalf. So probably that is a common problem there as well. You work for a company and you advise clients on the use of such technologies. What kind of advice do you give them generally? Don't use it at all, use it just for low stakes issues, or what's your recommendation there currently?
Currently, we advise the German Parliament, because we are part of the Office of Technology Assessment of the German Parliament, and our advice was not to use it for general elections, because there is, of course, the risk of cyber attacks by foreign states or by private actors for whom the Bundestag elections could be an interesting target. And the mere allegation that such an attack has been carried out or that it has taken place without this being a reality can massively undermine confidence in democratic processes. And it would be difficult to dispel unequivocally in the absence of a publicly verifiable recount or verification in the case of internet elections. And I think that is really the main problem, that the public nature of internet elections is not given, because the whole technological system behind that, the cryptography, all this is not understandable and comprehensible for most of us.
So is that essentially a matter of time, in the sense that you're saying not yet, and one day we will get there as technology advances, maybe also the acceptance of technology goes up further? Or are those more general things that will be true also in 10, 20 or 30 years? So is it a matter of progress that we make on the technological front, or is it a general issue?
I think the question is about which risks are you going to take, because even in the future there won't be any such thing as absolute security. We will have the same problems with the technology, I guess, that we have right now. we only will have relative security. So it is all about trust. But as we have seen it with the elections in the US and with the narrative by Donald Trump about the stolen elections, I think that was really a revival that voting on paper ballots is the gold standard because you can do public recounting. And if someone claims that he has manipulated the elections and there is a certain group of people who are going to believe this, then you cannot tell them, okay, let's do a public recounting because there is nothing to recount. Everything is digital, and we will have this problem in a world which has this geopolitical dynamics which we have right now. Maybe we will have a different look at these topics when we re-enter a new phase in world history. If you would have asked someone at the early 2000s if he would like to have internet voting, of course, at this time of internet euphoria, everybody would have said yes. But I think you can have digitalization in government and in democracies without having it in the voting process. And I think that digitalization can have a much prominent role in participation processes, that it can support these processes better than it can support voting.
That is an excellent segue to one of our fixed segments in the show, which we call
A Bold Prediction, The World in 10 Years.
And we always ask our guests to give us their best prediction on how the world will look like in 10 years from now. So, Simone, in terms of online voting, will we see it more widely spread in 10 years? So where do you think it'll be used? Which parts of the world? Which kinds of elections? What is your take there?
I think maybe some countries will try to introduce it. Maybe they will use it for their expats. Maybe they will use it for people who work at embassies or in the military. But I do not think that we will see it in everywhere and not in the democracies. I think we will see a world in turmoil repeatedly on the brink of war or even world war. And the problem is that democracies in this world will face two major challenges. And I think that these challenges are that mostly right-wing populist or terrorist groups within the democracies themselves will try to undermine and slowly transform them. And from the outside, authoritarian regime will try to contribute to the upheaval with fake news and deep fakes. And with artificial intelligence, anything can be fake: voices, videos, images, and these can spread at lightning speed through social media. And I guess especially in countries where ordinary citizens have access to guns, this can be very, very dramatic. But we will see also democratic governments fighting back. I think we will see massive fines on social media operators who do little to prevent the spread of hate speech and fake news on their platforms. But in this atmosphere, I cannot imagine that internet voting will spread.
So a bit of a gloomy assessment, both for democracy, but also more widely speaking for the use of online technology. And as you said, maybe that goes hand in hand. The more democracy is under threat and maybe is also attacked by people who want to bring it down, the less room there is for such a thing, such as internet voting, that requires a lot of trust in those people and those organizations who are running the system. What about blockchain? I mean, blockchain has been a topic for a long time now. It's still widely understood as being a technology that is still looking for a real use case to a large extent. Do you think that such things could be made useful for online voting?
I'm not skilled in cryptography, but I know from the expert discussion in this field that there is a low trust in blockchain. So blockchain won't be the solution for internet elections.
Okay. Good. So a lot of question marks, I would say, around this technology. As much as we love the use of internet for many things that we do in our daily lives, when it comes to such fundamental rights as the right to vote, especially in political elections, maybe that's still a step too far. Now, the other things that we always ask our guests is to give our listeners a few suggestions on things they might read if they want to learn a little bit more about the topic.
Executive Briefing, what you should read now.
So from your perspective, what is the executive briefing recommendation from your side for our listeners?
Maybe it's not a book about internet voting, but I think a book from that we can learn a lot about geopolitics. It's a fictional book, and it is called The Eighth Life for Brilka by Georgian author Nino Haratiashvili. And I received this book as a Christmas present, so I read it during the winter because it is really a page turner, but with a lot of pages, I guess, 1,000 pages. And The Eighth Life tells the epic story of lives of members of a Georgian family. Beginning in the 1900s, we see how the events of a century, the Bolshevik Revolution, the First and Second World Wars, the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union shaped life in Georgia, a subjugated republic on the edge of the Russian Empire and Soviet Union. And it becomes clear how much personal life of each individual is very much intertwined with history. And I guess that this book can help to understand what is happening in Georgia today, where Russia is trying to regain influence in order to prevent Georgia from joining the European Union.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. As always, we will put a link to that book in the show notes. And then the study that you did, that we mentioned, is that publicly available as well?
It is publicly available, yes. It's available in German, but there is no English translation.
Okay, we will still put the link to it also in our show notes for those of our listeners who do understand German. And if you don't, that's also the benefit of modern technology. You can always put it through some online translation service so that you will be able to get the most important pieces of information out of that study, I suppose. Simone, we've already come to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for sharing insights on apparently still a niche topic, but obviously very important thing. How can we improve the quality of our elections, make them more accessible without sacrificing trust and other fundamental principles of democratic elections? Thank you very much for being here today.
I have to thank you. Thank you very much for this interesting talk.
This was another episode of the Business Diplomacy Today podcast. This podcast is presented by the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe to it on your favorite podcasting platform. And of course, we would also be delighted if you would leave a review or a rating there. You can also go to our website at businessdiplomacy.today to check out the show notes of this episode. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening.